Only a few weeks before the fantasy playoffs are here. Every win is critical. Every week is critical. Let's talk some running backs here for week 11. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everybody's having a great week out there. Welcome to week 11 of the fantasy football season. It's here. The playoffs, they're right around the corner. And today we're talking about running backs. Who should we start and who should we sit here this week? Had a decent week last week, week 10. Had a few hits, a few misses. Missed on Fournette, Kerryon Johnson, and Dion Lewis were the biggest names. They had better games than expected. Yes, Fournette didn't look great, but he did get into the end zone twice, which is always going to help. I got a lot of flack last week. On this show, I had Marlon Mack and Joe Mixon as a potential sit. A lot of people said, no, there's no way you do that. They didn't quite perform, so I had a hit on those guys. Mark Ingram helped out. David Johnson was one of my starts of the week. He had, a number one running back type of week. It was a decent week overall. Very pleased with that. But now we're focused on week 11. I'm going to switch it up just a tad. I'm getting a few comments and questions here from people who are a little confused at times. If I'm telling you that to start multiple players, maybe they're all on your roster and I have them all as starts, then which one do you choose? Going to switch it up slightly. I'm not so much going to focus on the start-sit designation for the week. It's more on the analysis of the player, trying to help give you that perspective so you can make that decision whether you want to start them or sit them based off of my perspective and my analysis on each player. If you still have questions, by all means, ask them below. Huge community of people willing to help out, and I'll get to as many of them as I possibly can. But for now, we're still going to break down every game. We're going to talk about every running back, and it's going to happen right this second. First up is Thursday Night Football. We have the Green Bay Packers at the Seattle Seahawks. So we'll be talking about Aaron Jones. And finally, it happened. The heavens can rejoice. You can say that they freed Aaron Jones. However, he only had 15 carries. It's not like he went out there and touched the ball 25 times. 15 carries, 3 interceptions, but he made them count. 145 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. By far his best game of the year. It's what we've been saying all along. He is the best running back on the roster. He needs more touches. He got slightly more touches this week. He just did more with them, partly because of the defense he played. He went up against the Miami Dolphins, who were absolutely horrible against the run. But now they get to have a matchup here against the Seattle Seahawks, who are 17th ranked against opposing running backs. They have given up a touchdown the last 2 weeks. The negative side of that, it was Melvin Gordon and Todd Gurley. They score touchdowns on everybody pretty much. It's still a solid run defense, but Aaron Jones is definitely somebody who's starting to build momentum in this offense, and in my opinion, is still a great play here for Week 11. All right, for the Seahawks, you have this jumbled mess of 3 running backs. Sounds like Chris Carson is going to be back this week. Mike Davis, who's been productive in his time while Carson has been out, he's still there. Rashad Penny had his best game of the season, of his career. Great game last week for him. 12 carries, 108 yards, and a touchdown. And now Chris Carson comes back, and it goes to still a committee, but Chris Carson will still see lead back touches in this game. At least that's the assumption going forward, as long as he is healthy. It's a decent matchup against a Green Bay defense who is allowing 22 points per game to opposing running backs. And it's already been proven that these Seattle running backs can be productive on a weekly basis. Between these 3 guys, right now, they're averaging close to almost 22 points a game between the 3 of them. Right there, right around where the Green Bay Packers are giving up points-wise. These guys are still decent starts. As of right now, as the time of this recording, which is on Tuesday, Chris Carson sounds like he's going to be the lead back. He would be my top choice, still followed by Mike Davis. And now Rashad Penny could get bumped back down on the depth chart. Something we still need to wait and see. If I had to only start one of them, it would only be Chris Carson. As long as he's 100% healthy, good to go here on Thursday. On to Sunday, we have the Bengals at the Ravens. Starting off with the Bengals and Joe Mixon. He was a sit for me last week, and a lot of you guys did not agree with that call, which I totally understand as to why. Last week, though, Joe Mixon, 11 carries, 61 yards, no touchdowns. Only 11 points in PPR leagues. Wasn't a great performance from Joe Mixon. Partly that was due to the amazing run defense of the Saints, but it also had a big deal to do with the Saints being up by like 40 quickly. That game got out of hand. The game script got out of hand. Gio Bernard wasn't overly involved, but he is back in the mix. Joe Mixon this week, though, gets another tough test. What does he get after that New Orleans Saints defense? Now he gets the Baltimore Ravens defense, who have only allowed 3 rushing touchdowns on the season, like as a total. They've only allowed over 100 yards rushing 3 times this season. This is a great run defense in Baltimore. They're coming off the bye week. They're rested. They're fresh. I don't like Joe Mixon again this week. Now, if you have no better options, I understand you may have to roll with him. But if you have somebody on your bench with some high upside or a great matchup, I'm not against hopping off the bandwagon for Joe Mixon again this week. After this week, the games get a little bit better. But going on the road in Baltimore against this tough run defense, I'm not having too high of expectations for Joe Mixon here in Week 11. On the Ravens side of the football, it's completely different. Alex Collins over there is going to be one of my starts of the week this week. Somebody who has touchdowns in his last 2 games played. He's refreshed. He's coming off the bye week. And now they get the Cincinnati Bengals run defense, which I just mentioned last week that the New Orleans Saints absolutely torched. They gave up 220 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. And now Alex Collins comes into town, going to be at home, actually, against these Cincinnati Bengals. It really depends on what happens with Flacco, too. If Lamar Jackson does end up taking over this job, I believe it really helps Alex Collins going forward. More run-pass options. They're not going to expect Lamar Jackson to drop back and throw it 30, 40 times a game. Alex Collins is definitely somebody they could lean on down the stretch. Kind of similar to what we saw with him last year when he helped a lot of people make a run at the fantasy playoffs. I expect a lot of the same this week and going forward. Alex Collins is one of my starts of the week here for Week 11. Cowboys and Falcons are next, and it's about time, right? For the Dallas Cowboys, Zeke Elliott finally had himself a ball game. Finally gave him the opportunity to have one of those ball games. Went out there, 19 carries, 151 yards and a touchdown. Added in another 6 receptions, 36 yards and a touchdown through the air, giving him 36 fantasy points in PPR leagues on the week. This is what we've been waiting for Zeke Elliott. And I hate to say this as to maybe why. I'm not a huge Amari Cooper fan. I'm not. But this could be a glimpse of what's to come for Zeke Elliott. Amari Cooper is still a talented wide receiver. I've never taken away the talent part of it. And he's possibly drawing these defenders out of the box, giving them the opportunity to open up more running lanes for Zeke. You saw it last week. Philadelphia was a decent run defense, and he absolutely torched them. This is somebody who you have him. You draft him in the first round. Don't think about sitting him. This could be, something that absolutely opens up the floodgates. And now he's got a great matchup this week going up against the 30th ranked run defense of the Atlanta Falcons, who have given up rushing touchdowns 3 straight weeks, including last week. Nick Chubb absolutely torched this defense. They had 191 yards rushing in Cleveland and a touchdown on the ground. Great start. If you have Zeke, obviously, he's in your lineup. All right, for the Falcons, we got Tevin Coleman. And I'm done trying to figure out when Tevin Coleman's going to have a good game. Because he's supposed to have a bad game and he has a great game. He's supposed to have a great game and he has a bad game. And he is inconsistent as he could possibly be. Last week, in a game where he could have actually put up some decent numbers, 11 carries for 44 yards, no touchdowns. Whole lot of nothing from Tevin Coleman. And now he gets a Dallas defense that's very underrated. They are the 10th ranked defense against opposing running backs, giving up on average 20 points a game, however, have only allowed 1 rushing touchdown since week 4. This is definitely a solid defense in Dallas. Tevin Coleman is one of my sits of the week, not only for his inconsistencies, but for the matchup he's got here with the Cowboys. Bucks and Giants are next, and we'll start off with the Bucks, even though we really don't need to. Peyton Barber is somebody we'll talk about for a second, but I'm not going to waste a lot of time. He's definitely somebody that if you have to play him, it's really because you have no other option. You're in a deep league, a lot of bye weeks, whatever it is. You don't look forward to starting Peyton Barber. Last week against the Redskins, 13 carries, 61 yards, no touchdowns. Now he gets a decent matchup. The Giants are the 25th ranked defense against opposing running backs. They've given up at least 1 rushing touchdown every week for the last 4 games. So it's a decent defense. The problem is they're not dedicated to the run in Tampa Bay. They're going to throw. They're going to throw a lot. Yes, Jacquizz Rodgers had a great week last week, probably because they were in catch-up mode the entire time. A lot of garbage points, a lot of dump-off passes. Not something that we could see on a weekly basis. So Peyton Barber, you only start him unless you have no other choice. But if you're anything like me, you really don't want to hit the submit button with him in your lineup. For the Giants, you got Saquon Barkley, and he's coming off his worst fantasy performance of the year, which wasn't horrible. He did have 13 points in PPR leagues, 20 carries, 67 yards, added in another 4 receptions for 33. No touchdowns, though, but it doesn't matter. This is somebody who's going to touch the ball 20-plus times a week. Very few running backs in football get that amount of work, and now he has a great matchup once again, going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who over the last 5 games have given up 7 rushing touchdowns to opposing running backs. Definitely a team you want to start your running back against, on average giving up close to 26 points a game, and there's nobody to threaten Barkley for touches. I'm starting him regardless. I don't care if they wanted to play on the moon. All right, Steelers and Jags are next, and no Le'Veon Bell, right? He's not coming back. He's not playing this year. Never playing again probably for the Steelers. This is definitely something that I'm glad is now over. I'm sick of hearing about Le'Veon Bell on a weekly basis. I kind of had a hunch that this would happen in the preseason. A lot of people thought I was delusional, but I'm glad I turned out to not be delusional, because that would have been awkward. But now it's James Conner's backfield, right? This is going to be his backfield going forward. He's a definite start if you have him. Yes, he went into concussion protocol. Sounds like he's going to be fine for the matchup this week. It is a tough matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Giving up on average only 18 points a game. Haven't allowed a rushing touchdown since week 7, and that was against the Houston Texans. They've only allowed over 100 yards 3 times on the year. But James Conner, I don't want to call him matchup proof. However, as much as I'm going to limit expectations a little bit because of this matchup and them being on the road in Jacksonville, his volume can make up for it. He's going to be one of these guys that's going to touch the ball 20 to 25 times. I can see a lot of running in this game, a lot of smash mouth football, possibly some goal line carries. James Conner is still a great start for the week, and he's somebody that if you have him, you really can't afford to sit him just based off of the volume alone. Just make sure you're monitoring the practice reports. As long as he's fully healthy by week's end, I got no issues going forward from this point. Yeah, with James Conner, great start. All right, for the Jacksonville Jaguars, we have Leonard Fournette back now. Now, I mentioned him at the beginning of the show, somebody who I missed on. Didn't expect to have the type of game that he had, at least points-wise. He scored 27 fantasy points in PPR leagues, had 24 carries for only 53 yards, but also added another 5 receptions for 56 and a touchdown, which is not something we're used to seeing from Leonard Fournette. He touched the ball 29 times, after coming off injuries where he hadn't played since week 4. That's a lot of work for a guy that, coming off a hamstring injury. I was a little surprised at that, to be completely honest. However, his inefficiency really showed. He showed some rust this past week. He didn't look like, prime season Leonard Fournette, and that's for an obvious reason for him being out for a few weeks. He only averaged, like I said, a little over 2 yards a carry. Nothing to really write home about. Didn't look great. Had the touchdowns not been there, obviously, the fantasy day and the perspective of Leonard Fournette is way different, but the fact remains that he's going to get all those goal line touches, and if they can get him down there, he's going to get the ball. He's still a great start. It's a tough matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers, the 5th-ranked run defense against opposing running backs, giving up on average 18 points a game. However, they have also allowed a touchdown rushing the past 2 weeks straight. But if you have Leonard Fournette, you've probably held on to him for a while. Looking forward to starting him here end of the year, and there's no reason why you can't do the same this week. Texans and Redskins are next, and we'll start with Lamar Miller and the Texans, somebody who I really don't care for this week. Not just the matchup, but you really don't know which Lamar Miller you're going to get. Are you going to get the Lamar Miller from week 7 and 8, where he had over 100 yards rushing and a touchdown in each game? Or do you get the Lamar Miller from week 9, who went up against the Denver Broncos and had 12 carries for 21 yards? There is a huge swing there. He has a very low floor. Yes, the ceiling is there, but with Kiki QT possibly coming back, the addition of Demaryius Thomas, Jordan Thomas has been, a part of that offense. I can see a lot more passing this week against the Washington Redskins than I do see running the ball. The Redskins are the 12th-ranked defense against opposing running backs, only giving up 1 rushing touchdown in the last 5 weeks. This is definitely a solid run defense. If you take out that bad week that they had against Atlanta in week 9, where they gave up 148 yards and a touchdown, this is almost the number 2 ranked run defense in the NFL. Solid defense. Definitely somebody who you really need to limit expectations against. And when you already have the inconsistencies of Lamar Miller, it makes him hard for me to start him. For the Redskins, we got old man Adrian Peterson. Once again, not going to be able to really throw him in many lineups this week. that those injuries to the offensive line are going to be enough to almost end his season. At least that high upside that he had, that he showed us a few weeks there towards the middle weeks. Last week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a team that he should have had some success against had he had a decent offensive line. Still got the work, 19 carries, only had 68 yards because of it. He's not somebody who's going to be overly involved in the passing game, so he doesn't have that upside. Now he gets a tough matchup against the Texans, currently allowing 21 points to fantasy running backs. They have allowed a rushing touchdown their last 2 games, including 116 yards rushing and a touchdown to the Miami Dolphins in Week 8, another 75 and a touchdown to the Denver Broncos in Week 9. However, outside of that, they've only allowed 1 other rushing touchdown on the season. Definitely a solid defense coming off the bye week. Had time to prep for this game. I'm not a big fan of AP here in Week 11. Titans and Colts are next, and I can't believe I'm going to say this for the Titans. But let's talk about Derrick Henry for a second. I mean, this is somebody who's slowly starting to become more and more fantasy relevant. It looked like he was done for the year. Wasn't doing anything. His last 3 games, he has 4 rushing touchdowns. Now, yes, his rushing numbers are not huge. Last week against the Patriots, 11 carries, 58 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's now double-digit points the last 3 straight games for Derrick Henry. It's a decent matchup against the Indianapolis Colts, who give up on average 26 points to opposing running backs. Last week, the Jacksonville Jaguars, you heard what Leonard Fournette did there, 70 yards, a touchdown by the Jacksonville running backs. I like Derrick Henry this week, and I don't even know why I'm saying that. It's Derrick Henry, but they're starting to involve him more. He's going to get the goal line work, it seems like. Dion Lewis has had some decent games, but last week he still got 20 carries, which is great volume. Only turned it into 57 yards, and only had 2 receptions for another 11. If he doesn't get those passing numbers, Dion Lewis is not going to blow you away with his rushing stats. If Derrick Henry is going to take away that touchdown upside, all of a sudden Derrick Henry becomes a little bit fantasy relevant. I think he has a decent matchup. Dion Lewis, in my opinion, may be somebody who's more PPR based, even though last week it didn't really look that way. This could slowly start turning Derrick Henry's favor. And if he may be available on your waiver wire. If he is, go grab him and stash him on your bench. This is 3 straight weeks with at least 1 touchdown. He's somebody who could be a decent play here in the coming weeks when they have some decent matchups. I actually like Derrick Henry a little more than Dion Lewis this week. I didn't think I was going to say that. All right, on the Colts side of the football, we have Marlon Mack, somebody who I wasn't overly high on last week. Had him as a sit last week, and a lot of people thought that was kind of crazy. What did he do? Came out 12 carries for 29 yards against the Jacksonville Jaguars team that basically shut him out. What does he get dealt with this week? More than likely one of the top defenses, not only against running backs, but in all of football. The Tennessee Titans, currently number 2 against opposing running backs. They've only allowed 3 rushing touchdowns on the year. 2 of them came in the same game in Week 6. This is definitely a team that is really coming together here, second half of the season. One of the top defenses in all of football, giving up the fewest points to opposing teams. They just don't get a whole lot of credit for it. They're not really on the national stage a lot. I think sometimes their lack of offense kind of takes away people's perception of them, but they are a very, very solid team, a very, very difficult team to run against. I'm going to do the same thing this week. I'm going to stay away from Marlon Mack if at all possible. More than likely, you have other options on your bench that have higher upside. To me, he's a huge risk. Once again, even though they're going to be playing at home, I see a lot more throwing in Andrew Luck this game than I see Marlon Mack. Panthers and Lions are next, and Christian McCaffrey is an automatic. I don't care who else you have. You put him in your lineup. He's had 7 touchdowns over the past 3 weeks, and then they waive C.J. Anderson, only proving the point that they're going to roll Christian McCaffrey as many times, as many snaps as they possibly can. He's a surefire RB1 from this point going forward. He has been all year. For the Lions, we got Kerryon Johnson, and somebody who I didn't expect to have the game last week that he did. 14 carries, 51 yards, and a touchdown on the ground, and then added in another 6 receptions for 38 yards and a touchdown through the air, giving him 24 fantasy points in PPR leagues. A great day for Kerryon Johnson against a very tough run defense of the Chicago Bears. He gets another tough matchup this week. Yes, the Carolina Panthers, the 6th-ranked defense against opposing running backs, giving up on average almost 19 points a game. They've allowed 2 rushing touchdowns in their last 3 games. Kerryon Johnson, despite the tough matchup, we thought it was tough last week. We know that this kid can put up the numbers if he can get the volume. Hopefully they continue to give it to him. Yes, LeGarrette Blount is still in the mix, but the most important thing to me from what I can see is even though Theo Riddick was back and healthy and playing, Kerryon Johnson still had 6 receptions. If that can continue, this guy could be close to a high-end RB2 rest of season. He's going to be one of my starts of the week here for the running back position in Week 11. Broncos and Chargers are next, and for the Broncos, we're talking Phillip Lindsay, because it doesn't quite sound like Royce Freeman's going to be back yet. He could get back to practice, whether he plays or not, up in the air. This is Phillip Lindsay's backfield, though, going forward. He's going to touch the ball close to 20 times a game. He's involved in the passing offense. He's getting close to 15 to 18 carries a game in the backfield. He does have 3 rushing touchdowns on the year and 1 receiving touchdown, so 4 touchdowns total so far. Double digits every single game with the exception of Week 3 and the Baltimore Ravens. Now it's a somewhat difficult matchup, kind of middle of the road against the Chargers. They haven't allowed a rushing touchdown by an opposing running back since Week 7. And now they have been much improved on the defensive side of the football, but they're still giving up on average 23 points a game. Phillip Lindsay is somebody who I really like this week. The Los Angeles Chargers can go up and put up points quickly. They're going to have to continue to throw and put up points in Denver. Now that Demaryius Thomas is gone, yes, Courtland Sutton gets a bump, but so does Phillip Lindsay. He's going to be one of my starts of the week here for Week 11. For the Chargers, really the only one we need to talk about now is Melvin Gordon. Austin Eckler is slowly kind of being phased out, which is kind of weird to me. I don't know why they would overuse or give Melvin unnecessary touches at certain points of the game where they could give him a little bit more rest and keep him fresh, but they don't really need to. The guy's running crazy right now. 18 carries, 93 yards this past week against the Oakland Raiders. The week before that against the Seahawks, 16 carries, 113 yards and a touchdown. He looks great. Highly involved. If you have Melvin Gordon, you're happy about it. He's a top 5 fantasy running back, and he has a great matchup against the Denver Broncos team, giving up almost 26 points a game. Love some Melvin Gordon once again. Raiders and Cardinals are next, and for the Raiders, I don't really want to talk about anybody on the Raiders, but we can talk about Doug Martin for a second. That's about all you get with Doug Martin. He hasn't done anything great. He hasn't been horrible. He hasn't been good. No rushing touchdowns on the year, but he's getting close to 15 touches a game. So it's somewhat, an option, I guess you could say, to play if you're in a deeper league, or maybe you had one of these running backs that are on bye this week. He had 15 carries for 61 yards this past week against the Chargers. It's a great matchup, though. And that's the only reason we're really talking about Doug Martin. It's because they're going up against the Arizona Cardinals, who are giving up on average almost 30 points a game in PPR leagues to opposing running backs. Last week against the Chiefs, it's the Chiefs, so obviously those numbers are going to be inflated, right? Well, let's take it back another step. Let's go back to Week 8, their last game. They gave up 98 yards rushing to the San Francisco 49ers. Before that, they'd given up over 100 yards every single game, with the exception of Week 2. You can definitely run on the Cardinals a lot easier than you can throw on them. Doug Martin isn't a horrible play. I wouldn't look forward to putting him in my lineup, but if I had no other choice, I may roll the dice on him as a flex play only in deeper leagues, and that's about it. For the Cardinals, we got David Johnson, and I talked about it last week. I really expected a heavy dose of David Johnson coming out of their bye week, and it happened. 21 carries, 98 yards, and a touchdown on the ground. Another 7 receptions, 85 yards, and a touchdown through the air. This is the David Johnson that everybody wanted early in the season, and I think we're actually going to see a decent amount of it going forward. Great matchup again this week, getting the Oakland Raiders, giving up on average 27.9 points per game in PPR leagues. Not a whole lot of people in that backfield to take touches away from David Johnson. They're going to include him a lot. The Raiders have allowed over 100 yards to opposing running backs 4 straight games, including 3 rushing touchdowns in those 4 games. Great play. David Johnson is trending up. The guy who you picked with an early pick, you may finally be able to get the payoff for it here in the coming weeks. Eagles and Saints are next, and this game could be fun and exciting, but maybe not so much on the running side of the ball for the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm avoiding all these guys, to be honest, this week. I mean, Wendell, don't tell me I have Smallwood. He did nothing last week against the Cowboys, only had 2 carries for 4 yards. Corey Clement came in with a whole 5 carries for 13. If anybody has some upside on this team, it's Josh Adams. I talked about it in my waiver wire show. Maybe somebody you can go stash on the bottom of your bench as a late season flyer with somebody who may have some potential, the last few weeks of the season. He had 7 carries for 47. He was the most productive. It is a very difficult matchup. The Saints are the number 3 ranked team against opposing running backs. They shut down the run. They've only allowed 2 rushing touchdowns their last 4 weeks. Haven't allowed over 100 yards rushing to an opposing running backs all year in any game this year. This defense is much improved. The Saints as a whole look like a team to be reckoned with. They're on their way. They're making their run to the playoffs and possibly even the Super Bowl. They look great. I don't want anything to do with the backfield of the Philadelphia Eagles this week. On the other side, you have Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram. Alvin Kamara must start every single week. Doesn't matter the opponent, the matchup, where the game's being played, what the weather is, what the temperature is outside, how many people are in attendance, how much a hot dog costs. That don't matter. You're starting Alvin Kamara. Mark Ingram is usually the question mark every single week. Had him as a start last week. Really felt that he was going to have a good game and did. Had 13 carries for 104 yards on the ground. And then added in 3 more receptions for 58 yards and a touchdown. By far his best game on the season. And you're finally starting to see a little bit of the same backfield we saw last year, right? With Kamara and Ingram really feeding off each other, setting up the passing game. They did just sign Brandon Marshall there. It's still Michael Thomas's receiving group. He's going to get the bulk of the looks there. But going forward, this is a difficult matchup. Yes, against the Philadelphia Eagles. Zeke just absolutely tore them up on the ground. But going forward, Ingram and Kamara, I have them both as must-starts. Pretty much have them penciled in every single week. Remainder of the season, they got some great matchups coming up, and I really like what I see out of the entire Saints offense. And Mark Ingram's finally going to start producing some numbers here second half of the season. Sunday Night Football, we have the Vikings and the Bears, and now it's back to Dalvin Cook's backfield in Minnesota. Looked decent in his last game before the bye week. Week 9 against the Lions, had 10 carries for 89 yards. Looked explosive. Broke off a big run, and now they're going to, slowly let that leash out and give him more and more. How does he get rewarded? With the Chicago Bears. Congratulations, Dalvin Cook owners, if you held on to him. But the Chicago Bears looked vulnerable somewhat last week. Kerryon Johnson did great against them, but that was their first rushing touchdown allowed on the season. This is not a team that you can run on easily. They're going to be playing on the road in Chicago. The only thing that they really have going for them in the running game for the Minnesota Vikings is there's a chance that Stephon Diggs comes back. So that's secondary. Those linebackers, those athletic linebackers, may be dropping back into coverage a little bit more just because there's so many weapons that they can beat you with on the Minnesota Vikings pass side of the football. That may open up more run lanes for Dalvin Cook. If you have him and you have no better options, I still think he's a decent play here in Week 11. I just have limited expectations. I'm not expecting the big game. If it happens, it's going to be due to a long run, a breakaway run, a home run style touchdown. If you're basing it just off of touches, he may struggle slightly. It is a difficult defense despite what Kerryon Johnson did last week. I still like Dalvin Cook, but I'm just, tempering expectations just a little bit, and he's more of a low-end RB2 for me this week. On the Bears side of the football, we have Tariq Cohen and Jordan Howard. Now, there's a lot of Jordan Howard owners out there that were excited. He's finally started to score some touchdowns. He had 4 touchdowns in their last 3 games before last week. Then he comes out against the Detroit Lions, which is a great matchup. He gets 11 carries and gets 21 yards in it. No touchdowns. He looked totally out of the game plan. Wasn't really involved. And then you really start to peel back some of the numbers on Jordan Howard. He really hasn't been doing well. The only thing that was making those numbers look better to a fantasy owner was the touchdowns. If you take away those touchdowns, he's one of the most inefficient running backs in all of football. In the games where he's scoring these touchdowns, 12 carries for 39 yards, just over 3 yards a carry. 22 carries for 81 yards, just under 4 yards a carry, his best game by far. Next game against the Bills, 14 carries for 47 yards. You're starting to notice a little bit of a trend here. His yard per carry is not very good. And the problem with that is he's not constantly getting those big bulks of carries. He's not going out and getting 22 carries a week. You saw it last week against Detroit, 11 carries. Now he gets the Minnesota Vikings, one of the hottest defenses before they went on their bye last week. They've only allowed 1 rushing touchdown to opposing running backs in their last 3 games, averaging on average 19.7 points a game to opposing running backs. I see a lot more Tariq Cohen in this game. You can throw on the Bears a lot easier than you can run on them. And the Vikings have a pretty prolific passing offense. They'll still be able to score against these Bears. Tariq Cohen may be more involved in this game plan. He had 7 carries for 15 yards and a touchdown. added another 6 receptions for 29 yards through the air. I see a lot more Tariq Cohen this week than I do Jordan Howard. And if you got one or the other, or you get to choose, to me, Tariq Cohen is the better start. This game flow may lead a little bit more his direction. Chiefs and Rams are next in what could be a very exciting Monday Night Football game. Hopefully the field conditions get better at the stadium they're playing in Mexico. There's already some players complaining that they don't want to go out there and risk injury. Still a few days away. Hopefully they can get that taken care of. If you have either one of these running backs in this game, Hunt or Gurley, do I really need to sit here and tell you how good they are? If you have them, you're starting them no matter what I say or anybody else says. It could be a huge game full of offense. Kareem Hunt and Todd Gurley, they're must-starts every week. All right, that was the breakdown of every matchup this week for Week 11. Hopefully that was able to help you a little bit. Hopefully help you make some of those decisions in your lineup. If not, hit it up in the comment section down below. Lots of people here to help out. Keep it a positive community, not a bunch of people down there being derogatory or rude. I kind of keep an eye on that. Trying to make sure this is a very positive community for people to come who really enjoy football, fantasy football. They want to talk sports. We got lots of people that like to talk sports. I enjoy talking about it with you. Be on the lookout for the Saturday afternoon live show, looking to be around 3:30 p.m. on Saturday. Make sure the subscribe button is checked. Make sure your notification bell is checked. You don't want to miss it when we go live. We have a lot of fun. I'll be letting it flow. We'll be answering your questions for over an hour. It's going to be a great time. Make sure you guys are ready for that. Get your questions ready. Really appreciate the support, and be on the lookout for the other start-sit videos. All the other breakdowns, got them coming for wide receiver, tight end, quarterback. And even though we're past the waiver wire period, go back, check out the episode. I got a lot of names in there that may still be available, that may be able to help you out here end of the week. Hopefully you guys have a good rest of your week, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.